Hi there and welcome to my Psychology of Resilience vlog. I am doing this in response to coronavirus and I thought I would start the first one off with the title of Why Are People Being So Weird? So things like why are they bulk buying when we've been told there's plenty to go around? Why are other people ignoring the advice and the request to stay at home and going out anyway? Why are people getting so angry about the fact that other people might be getting in their car to go to the park to walk the dog? And then why are people singing to their neighbours from their balconies in Italy, or going out and helping neighbours that they would normally have just passed by with just maybe a quick hello? So my name is Leona Deakin. I am a psychologist and I specialise in resilience and how people cope with change. And I've been trying over the last week to think how I might be able to help or contribute, being somebody who is at home and trying to homeschool her 6-year-old for half of the week. And I thought that I would just start with a little bit of insight and information around resilience and the behaviours that we're seeing as a result of coronavirus, and then see where it goes. So please do feel free to send your questions or comments to me on Twitter. I'm at LeonaDeakin1, which I'll put at the end. And I will do one of these every week and see if I can answer some questions or just give some useful tips. So like I say, I wanted to start this first one with why we're seeing some of the really weird behaviours and why it's bringing out sort of the best and the worst in people, this global pandemic. But also I wanted to give you some tips and tools for starting to build resilience. And actually by looking at some of the stranger behaviours that are being inspired by this particular phenomena, we actually learn quite a lot about how to build our resilience. Okay, so I wanted to start by just telling you a little bit about the brain, because if you understand how the brain responds to things like fear and anger and sadness, then you can get a sense of actually what we can do to protect ourselves from those emotions, because they can become quite harmful. So bear with me here. I want you to imagine for a moment that this broccoli is your brain. Now, clearly a cauliflower would have worked better image-wise, because the brain does look a bit more like a cauliflower. It's sort of a creamy light grey colour. But in my local co-op, there were no cauliflowers left. So I'm assuming that that's a bit of a bulk buying item. Maybe there's lots of people having some comforting cauliflower cheese in these difficult times. So I'll go with the broccoli. It works just as well. Because what I want you to pay attention to here is all the intricacy of this broccoli. Look at all of the different parts, all of the little nodes in there. This is a good analogy for the human brain, or at least the outer surface of the human brain, where all of our reasoning and thinking and decision-making capacity live. It is the part of the brain that makes us human. It's the reason why we have science and literature and medicine, thankfully. But there's another part of the brain that's playing a big part at the moment, and that is the same part of the brain that we share with all mammals. So if you imagine that this orange is that part of your brain that sits within the broccoli, and it holds very primitive, primal and protective functions. It's where our fight and flight system sits and where our emotions come from. So you know that if I cut this orange up in half, you would see some sort of big segments of things going on. It's very simplistic, and again, that's a good comparison for that sort of more primitive part of our brain. And what it does, what it has the capacity to do, when we feel an emotion like fear, which obviously is inspired by this coronavirus, because it's like the ultimate bogeyman, isn't it? It's everywhere, it's invisible. We don't know who's got it, and we don't know what will happen to us if we get it. So it's hugely frightening. So that fear response means that our orange releases all of this fear hormone, and it floods the broccoli with it, absolutely floods it. And this means that we essentially put on some fear glasses. So we start looking at the world through this lens of anxiety. And it means that we pay attention to the things that instigate a sort of feeling of fear. So we pay attention to the news stories that tell us how scared we should be. We pay attention to things coming into our house that might be infected. We pay attention to our neighbours who are flouting the rules and going out. What are they doing? And all of these things sort of build this heightened level of anxiety. And we have hormones like adrenaline and cortisol that are released into our brain, and these do things like sending blood to our hands to ready us for the fight, and blood to our feet to ready us for flight. But of course we can't flight from the coronavirus. It is here with us for a sustained amount of time, and so we need to learn better ways of coping with this. And unfortunately, when the brain just keeps flooding us with all of this fear, then it can become something that's quite harmful. So when we have chronic levels of our fight and flight response going on, heightened stress levels, it can lead to high blood pressure and heart disease and strokes. So there's a very good reason why we want to dissipate all of this negative emotion. Now, there are some differences in human beings and how they respond in to these sorts of emotions that we know from studying major disasters, floods, fires, earthquakes. So we know that we fall into 3 distinct categories. So some of us panic to such a degree that we don't think rationally. So there's so much orange juice flooding the broccoli that the broccoli can't actually work as it should. So our decisions become more emotionally hijacked, and actually we find that people who panic to that degree start putting themselves and others in harm's way. So this potentially explains some of the reasons why people might be bulk buying, because those messages of stop, slow down, it's okay, there's plenty to go around, and not getting through, because that sort of lens of fear that people are looking through is so strong that they're just sort of panicking and looking after themselves and thinking about their own survival and sort of doing things that aren't necessarily rational. And these are people that would normally be very balanced. So it is one of those things that's about the situation that we face, and it just triggers a certain response in certain people. There's also a population of people in a crisis and in a disaster who are walking around as if nothing's going on, no wrong is occurring. And these people have a very heightened level of calm. It takes quite a long time for their anxiety levels and fear levels to be stimulated, and so they just carry on thinking very rationally and being very calm. So our individuals who are carrying on as if nothing is happening may well fall into this category. They may be people who sort of haven't been scared enough yet. And so maybe that's something about how communication is occurring and the message is getting through, and a bit of peer pressure from the rest of us, and those people will start to sort of conform and fit in. However, that response of carrying on as if nothing's going on can also be part of that first group of individuals, the heightened fear response. Because particularly with our own mortality, when the fear is so high, when it's so scary, that it might actually mean our own demise, we go into this weird denial phase, and we start sort of telling ourselves that, well, it's not really going to happen to me. This is the reason why messages such as don't speed and don't smoke have such a limited effect, because the it won't happen to me factor is a strong defence mechanism, isn't it? And so thinking of contra evidence like, well, I don't know anybody who's got the virus yet. I've heard that most of the hospitals are just waiting. They're not full of patients and overwhelmed. And I'm hearing that this is all for political gain. This is something that people have done on purpose. You know, so there's all of this information around us that we can sort of use to sort of back up our own responses to this and justify our behaviour, which might not necessarily be the most socially protective behaviour. But the good news, well, there's 2 bits of good news. One is that most of us don't fit in those 2 extreme categories. We are in the middle. We make rational thoughts despite the fear. We do things that are socially beneficial and good for our safety, irrelevant of the fact that we're feeling scared. So most of us are doing what we are being asked to do. We are washing our hands, we are social distancing, we are isolating and staying away from the vulnerable. We are. But what I wanted to sort of, I suppose, highlight about the way we respond, our brain responds to these types of fear triggers, is that we do have some control over it. So the good news is, irrelevant of whether you fall into that very panicked or quite normal or very calm category, you have some control over how much the fear is allowed to affect you. So if you get one dose of fear, let's say from a message from the Prime Minister that none of us can leave our homes anymore, so that's quite a fearful message, and that initial flooding of fear into your broccoli will last about 20 minutes, unless you feed it. If you feed it, if you keep looking for more and more stories, more and more occasions of how this is affecting the world, if you talk about it, if you read about it, if you think about it, you feed that fear, and it continues to flood your reasoning capacity, and it floods your brain and your ability to, I suppose, put things in perspective and look after your health and your well-being. But there's another thing within our orange that's very helpful in this situation, because fear, anger, sadness, disgust are not the only emotions that sit within this orange. We have two others. We have surprise, which, really depends on what you have in front of you, because present and tiger, very different. And then we have joy. So there might be some people out there who are saying, oh no, you can't just tell us all to cheer up and look on the bright side and it's going to be okay. And this is just positive psychology. It's hippie nonsense. But no. Joy sits in our fight and flight response. So it has to have some purpose to our survival. And indeed it does. It's the very essence of resilience. It's what makes us brave. So back in the day, when we did actually have to run away from tigers in order to hunt our own food, when we got back to our homes, we would be flooded with endorphins of joy. And that made us brave enough to go out hunting again. So the same principle applies within this very strange situation of our global coronavirus pandemic, because actually one of the core elements of becoming more resilient is to not feed the fear by thinking and reading and talking about things that heighten our levels of anxiety, but actually that we turn up the joy and we start finding ways of making ourselves feel more capable and confident to handle this very strange phenomena that we've been asked to assist the country with. And so I wanted to give you 3 tips for how you can really turn up that joy and sort of fight against that sort of fear response, which will still be there, but what you want to do is just quieten it down a bit so that it doesn't end up distracting you and affecting your mood and making you ill. So one thing you need to do is to find purpose. Yeah. So one of the things we know from people who have lived through very extreme situations, from being institutionalized to living in submarines or up in space, the space station, is that they have to find meaning in the things that they do. So whether you're looking to become better at homeschooling, like I am with a 6-year-old, whether you are volunteering to help the NHS, whether you're out there as a key worker helping the community, or whether you're just looking after your garden, spring cleaning your house, painting, writing, reading those books that you never got around to. Try and find things to do that make you feel like this time is not being wasted, that it is something that is fueling your resilience and making you feel like you are having a better and more positive experience. Ask yourselves, am I doing this to help me, or is it harming me? So when you're reading all the newspaper articles on the people who've died and feeling very sad and sorry for their families, ask yourself, is this just making me feel worse? Am I making myself feel worse by constantly looking at this information? Could I be doing something more constructive with my time? And that involves thinking, well, what am I thankful for, actually? What are the sort of 3 things every day that make me grateful? And finally, fight and flight response wants you to move. That's the fundamental thing, to get away from the danger. We can't actually get away from it, but we can move. Out 20 minutes of walking every day will dissipate those fight and flight emotions and keep your resilience levels higher.